So yeah, these FOIA Friday sessions, like I said, are going to be a mix of a few things. Hopefully, a lot of practical information for you all, and also just a space to talk about requests that you're working through or any challenges that you have. It looks like some people have already done a really great job filling out their name in the roll call. This Q&A document is in the chat, and Kelly can link to it again for anyone who just came in. But it's got an agenda, it's got links and resources. It can also be a place for you to write questions for me or questions for the group in general that we can talk about in this call or come back to on later calls. There is also a little bit of room for announcements and brags or kudos. If there's anything you're working on and you want to share it, you can do that there. And yeah, I'm just going to start by filling in from myself right above David. Oops. So yeah, I would just say I'm Dylan Bergen. I'm a data reporter at Muckrock. And I'll also say I'm really interested in pollution and requests about the environment, which is what we're going to talk about today. So yeah, here we go in the agenda. I wanted this first part of the session to be a file along. So I'm going to file this request and you can just hang out and watch me do it, or you can file the request on Muckrock as well, or you can copy the language and save it for later when you want to file it another time, whatever you want to do. I just want to start these sessions off with something really practical. I know a lot of people like watching other people game or watching other people code. So hopefully this is a place where you can just kind of tune in, and if there's something useful about a way I'm approaching a request or a document we're talking about, you can just go ahead right away and file that. So yeah, what we're filing today, what we're cooking, we are filing for legal notices. These are often called demand letters or notices to sue or pursue legal action. These are important because public agencies are sometimes required by law to serve these notices to parties that are in trouble. We wrote about these in our first inaugural doc dive this week, which is another new feature we're working on the editorial side of Muckrock, which basically is just going to break down one document we filed in an investigation recently and try to give you the information to decide whether you want to file that right now and the language to do that if you want to. We do investigations with local newsrooms across the country, and we also help people file a lot of requests. And sometimes a lot of our educational materials get lengthy. We have lots of different types of documents. We have lots of different types of requests. And we wanted to give people a different entry point, to just file one single request on a Friday afternoon and feel good that they participated in FOIA Friday and got a request off. And I imagine when these requests are coming back, a useful thing will be for us to talk through different challenges we face along the way once we file this request. So this doc dive is about these legal notices. We filed these requests for these type of legal notices with the Cicero Independiente in an investigation about a coal tar plant. This coal tar plant is 101 years old. It has a long history in Cicero of air pollution, complaints from local community members, and violations of environmental laws. And that's kind of how this started. So we got a violations notice, which is a separate document, and this violations notice had 25 violations on it. And we were trying to make sense of, how many violations this company has had, where they fit into the broader scheme of things. And so we went to different public agencies in Illinois and asked about coppers and asked if there was any other type of thing going on in their agency related to coppers. We eventually made it to the state AG in Illinois, and they said, yeah, actually we have 2 referrals from the Illinois EPA about coppers, but we can't really tell you what the referrals are about. They fall under what we talk about down here, exemption number 5 in the Federal Freedom of Information Act, which is attorney-client privilege, and often in state public records acts. So we thought we hit this wall with figuring out what deeper trouble Coppers was in, and so we tried to file the requests for the referrals themselves, or we did file those requests, and they were rejected on the basis of attorney-client privilege, saying, these referrals themselves are, until they're actually filed in court in public or public in some other way, they're exempt because of attorney-client privilege. So we knew there were these referrals within the AG's office. We didn't really know what they were about, but we wanted to figure out what they had to do with. And so after I filed this request, I called the Illinois EPA back to talk to them about a few different requests. And this is a really great example of just talking with a public records custodian, because while I was on the phone with him, he said, I saw your other request related to those referrals. There is, of the many different types of compliance correspondence that you requested, there is a document that doesn't fall under attorney-client privilege. And that is what comes right before the referrals, which is the notice to pursue legal action, or what they call NITPLA within the Illinois EPA. So that's the request that I filed, and it helped us get at the question of what kind of legal trouble Coppers was in Illinois without running into the wall of exemption number 5. I was pretty excited about this because I thought, that's awesome. I wouldn't have been able to figure out what these referrals were about in any other way until they were filed. And they were sitting in that office for 2 years already. And so sitting in the office for 2 years under the wall or behind the wall of exemption number 5, really no one could know what they were about. But there is this part of the compliance correspondence process where the Illinois EPA has to notify Coppers before filing any referral with the Attorney General. And so that's the document you see here. It's relatively short. It's not the whole set of all possible legal documents involved in this case were it to be pursued. But basically it says, on this date, the Illinois EPA is letting Coppers know that we are considering legal action. And it says, this is what were the basis of our legal action. We know you violated, or believe you violated, these parts of clean air laws. And because of that and the lack of ability of you to fix those things, we're now going to file a lawsuit. So it was then really useful for us in understanding the broader context of Coppers. And so what I wanted to do in this first part of the file along is just file that request again. But I'm going to file it for all facilities in Philadelphia. I live in Philadelphia. You can see at the bottom of that doc dive, we link to the request. If you're watching this and have a Muckrock account that you can pull up on another screen or switch back and forth between, you can go ahead and just click clone to file this request. If you're not on Muckrock and you're just filing requested emails, you can also just click copy and paste that into an email. So I'm going to go ahead and clone this, and definitely going to change the title. I'm going to change it to, I think I actually got this acronym wrong. I think there's also a T there, so I'm going to get rid of the acronyms that are wrong, because acronyms are tricky anyways in government agencies. I'm just going to say notice to pursue legal action. I'm going to say notices to pursue of intent to pursue legal action. And I'm going to file that with the Pennsylvania Pennsylvania. And I'm going to say any and all notice of intent to pursue legal action letters, and I'm going to, I don't want it for just one facility this time around. I want it for all of Philadelphia. So I'm going to say um, issued to facilities in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, um, from, let's say, January 1st, um, we'll make that AP style, January 1st, 2024, to the date this request is ultimately fulfilled. I'm not entirely sure if this will pan out to be a good date range for them. Um, what will be interesting and what I don't actually know yet is how many notices like these are filed to permitted facilities in a given city, especially a big city like Philadelphia. So I may end up having to narrow this request, but I feel like these are pretty standard correspondence and not that difficult to fulfill. So I'm going to try 1 year. Although I have a feeling I might have to narrow that to 6 months later on. I'm open to that, but I think I'm just going to start with a year. I think anything more than a year might come across initially as overly burdensome or something that they would argue is overly burdensome, and I'll have to narrow it anyways. To me, there's no science to this, at least in this case, but this feels like maybe not overly burdensome, but still a good amount of documents. So yeah, we have notices of intent to pursue legal action. That's fine. Department of Environmental Protection, Pennsylvania. Any and all issued to facilities in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania from January 1st. Yeah, and I'm not going to embargo it because you all can see this and use this later, and we can follow it in later FOIA Friday sessions. So I'm going to go ahead and click submit. This is a really helpful moment for me because I often have spelling mistakes in my requests, and it gives me a second to double check that I have not made any spelling mistakes that I need to edit. If anyone sees any spelling mistakes, please let me know now. Yeah, I think it's good. So this is going to send in 29 minutes if I don't click send now, but since I have the option to, I'm just going to click send now. For most users who don't have the admin privileges that I have, I don't think you'll see a send now button. You'll just be able to edit it and then it'll send automatically in 28 minutes. So yeah, that's off. And before we get to a few workshopping questions that came in, I just wanted to first open the floor and see if anyone has any questions on that document dive or anything I mentioned along the way. If anyone filed that request while you were on this call with me, or while you're on this call right now, you can go ahead and drop it in the chat. I would love to see it. Or if you didn't file it on Muckrock and you file it later through email, you can always put that in the Q&A notes that I shared at the beginning of the meeting and just let me know. I would love to keep track of these requests, where they go, how they're working with local agencies. Yeah, so just loop everyone in if you did file that request. I'm going to go ahead and move towards workshopping and questions, unless anyone has any questions initially about that request. All right, we're diving back in. So we have a few requests or a few questions that came in. I'm going to start with the top one and work my way down. I will also just plug that I will prioritize in these sessions questions that come in beforehand, just because I can better prepare a little bit and want to open up questions to everyone else as well while we're here. But it's especially useful, I think, if I can take some time to ask people inside of Buckrock, because we have a lot of institutional knowledge on FOIA requests and FOIA across the country. If we don't know the answer to your question, we can try to find the answer. So if you do have a chance before the next session, you can just click this feedback form and drop me a question there. I will start with this question from Pie Cake Cookies 24. I like all of those things, and that's not the only reason I picked this question. I picked this question because I think it's a really common question that we get at Muckrock from users. It's a really common question that I get when I'm presenting at a conference or talking to other reporters. And that question is, what do you do if the local government doesn't act on your FOIA requests? What do you do if they just don't respond? And I have some notes that I'll go over and I'll answer that question. But I also wanted to see if anyone else on the call has confronted this and has an answer to that question, or is interested in just talking about what they think the answer to that question might be. You can raise your hand, or I think you might be able to unmute yourself, or Kelly will unmute you. Any ideas? I know there's at least 3 people on this call who know the answer to the question, but I can take it from here. Dean Pierce said he has a Muckrock account and has not really used it, and will try to clone and file the request later. That's awesome. Keep us looped in this sheet. I'll keep this open until the next session, and you can feel free to put anything else in here if you file these requests later. To the question from Pie Cake Cookies, what do you do if your local government just doesn't respond? These types of responses are, oh, we have someone raising their hand.
Yeah, sorry, Dylan. I mean, you were looking for reactions. I had an experience where I had made a request in Vermont. You make a request with the keeper of the records, essentially the custodian, and you can appeal that. And it was the appeal that was basically ignored. And so in my particular case, the only way I could get anything done with their inaction was to appeal to Superior Court. So it was a pretty hefty, I mean, that's just one person, one situation at the state level with whatever peculiarities Vermont law has.
Yeah.
But I guess I would just say that, on the initial level, I'm working with small towns mostly. I think it's make a nuisance of yourself. Keep asking.
Yeah, that we can definitely get into. I'm also not interested, Dean, like, how did that end? So you appealed that, you went up a few different chains of hierarchy. How did that work in the end, or how did that process pan out for you? Because you're right, that is a pretty, it gets daunting the higher up I think you go, but I'm interested how that turned out for you.
Well, my situation was a complicated one because there were a series of requests, but ultimately I appealed to Superior Court. I received a data dump in the process at Superior Court. There also happened to be a change in judges because judges in Vermont rotate. I felt that the response wasn't complete. I got about 1,000 pages of material in the data dump. I did appeal to the Vermont Supreme Court because I believed that there were some additional materials. I had clarified things in communications. The ruling went against me basically because they determined that the things that I believe I had asked for previously but clarified, they said that was a new request. So it wasn't a successful trip in some people's minds because the Supreme Court didn't rule in my favor, but as a result of the appeal to Superior Court, I did get, 1,000+ pages of material. I also got the ruling from the judge that I was entitled to see the records in the format that I wanted. And this is also something that I'd be curious to learn more about is, as we are in the digital age, getting the data and the most advantageous format is something that I think is important. You can, you can use AI and digest a lot more data than you could in the past. So anyway, my story is I went to the Supreme Court, lost in a panel, so they didn't set precedent, but I did get 1,000+ pages of records in the slog along the way.
Yeah, that's great to hear. Thank you for sharing. I think you mentioned getting the right format of whatever documents or data you're asking for. That's definitely something we can come back to. I just earlier this week responded to a request that came back as hundreds of pages of PDFs of rows of data that I assume is in a CSV or a spreadsheet somewhere. And I think that's also a problem, unfortunately, that a lot of us have faced before, which is those just hundreds of pages of things that are actually tabular data. So yeah, I'll put a pin in that and think about coming back to that, maybe talking about my request that I mentioned earlier next week or when we do this next FOIA Friday session. I mean, yeah, and I think Dean, you already pointed to the first step in constructive denials or dealing with constructive denials, which again are just when an agency doesn't respond to your request, and that is making a nuisance of yourself. I will start before I guess I get to get making a nuisance of yourself. In this note here, you can see I included a little bit about what Muckrock's support side does when they see something that is a potential constructive denial or something that a user has pointed out to them as such. This comes from one of our very talented and helpful support staff members. She said the first thing that they do is contact the agency by phone and leave a message. They try to verify the current contact information that we have is correct, so the information that we have on the Muckrock portal. And then they escalate to the broader team at Muckrock. Again, luckily, we have a lot of institutional knowledge, especially with different agencies, and we kind of know what might be a problem agency or what agencies, especially looking at the full scope of all our requests on Muckrock, don't have the best track record on getting back to folks in a timely manner. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of behind the scenes of what's actually happening inside Muckrock. But yeah, like Dean said, the first thing that you want to do is make a nuisance of yourself. You may just have the wrong email or the wrong portal, or they don't use that portal anymore. They switched it over, but maybe they didn't communicate it the best to the public. So kind of trying to figure that out is the first step. Double down on following up with voicemails, reach out and check different communication channels. I would also say document everything because this could be important for your appeal later. One that kind of small tip that I have for dealing with this that I do often is when I always call because it's hard to reach people on the phone, but sometimes can be a much quicker route if you can get a hold of someone. So I will call and then I will follow up over email. And in my email, I will reference the voice message I left them, just so there's a full paper trail of my attempt to get them to respond to this request. So I will call them and leave them a voice message. And then in email, I will say, hey, I just left you a voice message to this number asking about this and this request. And so I go forward like that, just trying to document everything and figure out if this has reached the right place and if I can be sure that this is the right, that this FOIA request was seen or should have been seen and responded to in a timely manner. You can try different lines at the agency. Sometimes I call different parts of the agency and ask them if I have the right email for that other department or that other office. And this part is tedious, but it's basically setting you up for a good appeal. So the thing I would say is just don't be discouraged. You have rights under FOIA, and we do call this a constructive denial. So this is a denial for legal reasons, technically, but this is not necessarily a denial. They haven't properly followed the law, and it doesn't mean that this request won't find a way to come through eventually. Once you finish all that, you move to the appeal. One thing I'll say with this type of appeal for constructive denial is it's a really simple one, actually. There are a lot more complicated appeals, and we can get into those in our feedback form. Some other folks have mentioned that they want to see us talk more about appeals and exemptions in future sessions, so we can definitely talk about that. I think this is a pretty simple one, though. If you go down here to some of the documentation we have, this link to the life cycle of a Muckrock appeal describes to you what happens on Muckrock when you appeal a request, how you can do that. This link goes to just kind of a broader description of what we've found makes an effective appeal. And then we have a whole list of state-by-state constructive denial appeal examples for you as well. And you can see, let's see if I can find Pennsylvania. They're not super complicated. And I would just go find one of these. I'm not seeing Pennsylvania on here immediately, but New Jersey is near Pennsylvania, so we'll do Jersey. And you can go to these and just copy the language that you see here and plug in what is relevant to your request. And like I said, all the documentation that you built in trying to follow up on that request. The appeal itself won't be fairly long. It's just basically saying, hey, this is how long they have under the state public records law in my state. So you have 7 business days in New Jersey, and they didn't respond. The agency didn't respond in this time frame, the legally mandated time frame. And here's everything I've done to follow up. Often, whoever you're filing this appeal to or engaged in mediation with will ask for the request itself and any emails or follow-up communications. So at this point, you could just like print to PDF the email follow-ups that you sent and attach them to the appeal itself. Yeah, so that's, I think, the quickest way to get at dealing with a constructive denial. Like Dean mentioned, you may have to work your way up the chain to get a lawyer involved. Eventually, that comes to another question that came in through our feedback form, which is, do we have templates and examples for non-lawyers to use when we need to go to court over FOIA or sunshine laws? This is a lot larger conversation. As Dean said, it can be a long road. I think it's something worth coming back to in later FOIA Friday Zoom sessions. For now, though, I just wanted to point folks to this link here at the bottom, which is where they can find legal support. And this is just a page on our site with a few different organizations that you could reach out to in this case. I think later on, again, just like with appeals, they become more, just like with appeals, going to court becomes more nuanced and complicated and very request specific. And so I think maybe it would be more useful to break down the life of something like that. But for now, it would be worth just checking out this page on their site. I'm gonna check in the chat and see if anything else has come in. Let's see. We have a few other questions. One from Dean and one from Melinda. From Dean, we have a question about advice for interesting media in what you've uncovered. Dean, is this you, Dean Pierce? Is this the same Dean?
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit more? I'm interested in just hearing you describe a little bit more.
Sure.
About
yeah. Yeah, it's really just the how I know that reporters have jobs and they have a lot of stories that they could cover, and so if you seek records and you think that they're newsworthy, you have a sales job to do. I'm just interested in whether or not there's any kind of quick advice, or maybe you've got materials on Muckrock or some other place that you can recommend for selling. In my particular case, not to make it too much about me, in some settings, if you're dealing with local government, I guess I'll put it this way: reporters have to walk a fine line because they have an ongoing reliance, like in a municipal level in Vermont, they've got a reliance on a good relationship with the municipal manager if they're going to do their job. So they can't go hammer and tong after that person unless, it's like if you've got only one arrow to shoot the king, you've got to make sure it counts. So I'm just saying that there's hesitance I have found in local media when you're seeking records about people who they regularly cover and who are integral to providing them with access to the information they need to do their jobs on an ongoing basis. And again, not to make this too much about me, but in my particular case, it's such a small world. The person who was the subject of many of the record requests essentially worked as a member of the staff for the paper because, he'd published 300 or 400 photos of his in that paper. So they may have been less inclined. But just generally, what's your advice for hooking the reporters on the things that you found?
Yeah, and I can only say, generally from my perspective, also as a reporter. So I'm now a data reporter at Muckrock. Before coming to Muckrock, I was a Report for America Corps member in New Mexico with Searchlight New Mexico. So working as an investigative reporter in a local context. And I'm definitely very aware of, like you said, Dean, there is a responsibility to follow every lead that you get from the community. And just to be available to people reaching out to you and saying, hey, I think I found this. Can you take a look at this? And also, I think beyond even what you mentioned about working with local governments and not creating an adversarial relationship unless an adversarial relationship has to create itself. I think there is a strong sense of all reporters of maintaining your own editorial independence and really vetting everything that comes in as a tip. And that's something I think is really useful about Muckrock. I know as a reporter, if someone reaches out to me with documents that they say they have obtained about a certain member of a local government that are that could be damning or could be useful for investigative reporting or explain things that have been happening in the local government, whatever the documents illuminate, being able to link to the request and see the language itself and see the documents respond that the agency responded with, having a full paper trail of it. I think that would gain a lot of my trust as a reporter, because the first thing I would do as a reporter, if I were really interested in these documents and I thought they were really important for me to report on, is I'd want to refile the same request. I wouldn't be able to just take these documents and work off of them unless they were leaks or from a sensitive source, and that's like a whole different can of worms. But I think with being able to link to your request on Muckrock and publicly share the language, I think you immediately give a reporter a level of transparency that shows that they can replicate what you did and understand the integrity of the documents that you're passing. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, because the editorial independence of reporters is also important. So deciding, when they pursue something, when not, is a complicated issue in itself. But I think the best you can do is get them the documents and get them to trust you that you're giving them these documents from a place of good faith and hard work to get those documents that could be useful to the public. And Zachary makes a good point. Why do you not just become the media yourself and publish your own documents? That's a great point as well. You've done all the hard work in getting the documents. It's, I think, difficult to reach people outside of different types of media channels, but sometimes it can be a lot easier than you think. And there are different ways to engage the community, maybe on like a local Facebook or whatever your platform could be to find people to see the documents that you found and that are important to the public. And then maybe at that point, media would want to cover it. Any other questions that are percolating right now? I can also try to answer a few of these last questions that are already in the Q&A form. Um, Gwendolyn asked a question in the chat that I'm going to take first before I get to the last these two last questions. Because I think it's potentially really fruitful, and that is, what do you do when you only get partial info? That's a great question, Gwendolyn. The way that I would start that, you mentioned an appeal. I might actually start that just a little bit softer and reach back out to the agency, and be very clear that of what I requested in my original request, and be sure there wasn't some sort of confusion on their end. I think often there is when I get like partial responses. One, there is such thing as like a rolling response, which I think is really useful. And sometimes agencies are willing to get you documents quicker through a rolling response. But sometimes they just only actually fulfill your request in part, not from maliciousness or not knowingly, but because they didn't really read your response the way that you thought you were requesting it, or the language that you used didn't make as much sense to you as it did, didn't make as much sense to them as it did to you. So I would reach back out immediately, like as quick as I can, to the agency and say, hey, this is the language in my response. I don't see, these types of fields in the data actually included. What happened here? That's the first place I'd start. I see some other things in the chat. Gwendolyn, you say unfortunately has been months. Do you mean months that you've been waiting for the other part of your response? Okay. And you have tried reaching out directly to the agency? I'm not keeping up with your chat, so I'll just keep talking about. Okay, not yet. Yeah, I think that's the first place to start. And again, it for them, if they've already sent you the request and it totally life comes in between, you get sidetracked. I think if they see you waiting a long time, it might be harder to work with them than getting it back to them right away because the request is kind of fresh in their brain. But I think no matter what time it has been, you can reach back out and either try to refile a request or make sure that those parts of your request are fulfilled in a relevant time frame. I'm going to take one more question from the forum. And it is from Melinda, and it is there any advice on how to begin and maintain a request as anonymously as possible? This is something I don't know a lot about as a data reporter, as a reporter working for a news agency. My name is on all my bylines, my name is on all my requests, and that is part of my job. I should be accountable in that way. But of course, I think for different people from different backgrounds with different levels of vulnerability, that's not always the case, or they may not always want to be as public, or may not hold a public facing position like I do. So unless anyone else has any thoughts on that in this group, I might table that for a future discussion as well, and maybe do some research into it. I personally, though, just really don't know. I never really think about that in my requests. But I'm sure there are a lot of people who are and have to. Does anyone in the group have any thoughts on that, or have heard anything or experienced anything related to it?
Hi, this is Zachary here. From my own experience in Indiana, no, you can't be anonymous. Every request asks for your name, your address. We don't have an in-state residency requirement, but the request itself, as you just mentioned, is a public record. So outside of maybe casually actually going into a place and asking for records and they just give them to you, which is very, very rare. Most of the time they still have you fill out documentation. I know of no way, at least from Indiana, I think on the national level too, that you can submit a request without stating who you are. Now, I have heard other people use proxies of sorts, so if you do have a journalist friend or someone who's more comfortable that will make the request, obviously you're anonymous in that sense. And I've had people either I've done that for them because for whatever reason they don't feel comfortable making the request, or recommend that as a strategy, and that seems to work. So that might be something Melinda can do in their case.
Thanks, Zachary. That was really, really useful. And I see some other, it looks like, helpful responses coming in the chat. So Melinda, you can see what folks are saying there. And I think we're at 1:45, and I'm going to try to keep these to about 30 minutes to 45 minutes, and not push too much over an hour. But in closing, I just want to make sure everyone knows where the feedback form is. Kelly is dropping those links right there. If there's other things you want to see in these sessions in the future, specific questions you want to make sure I answer, documents you're interested in talking about more, I would love to know. So go tell us in that feedback form. And also join the Muckrock Slack. We have a public FOIA workshopping Slack, so you can follow up on these types of questions there, or find me there if you have any other questions. So yeah, thank you all so much for joining us today. We'll get this up on YouTube soon, and we look forward to the next FOIA Friday session. Happy Sunshine Week, y'all.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.